Imagine a crowded chamber filled with reporters, lawmakers, and a buzzing audience waiting for the next big headline. In the middle of it all, an unexpected insult is hurled, not just at a senator, but at his daughter. The room goes silent, cameras zoom in, and everyone braces for the response. But what followed was not anger, not chaos, but something no one could have predicted. John Kennedy's reaction didn't just silence the room, it sent shockwaves across the nation. Why did this moment strike such a chord? Because it revealed the difference between politics as spectacle and politics as leadership. When someone in power crosses the line, when words meant to wound are thrown into the open, most expect retaliation, maybe even a heated exchange. That's what fuels headlines and late-night clips. But this time something different happened. Kennedy showed that dignity is not weakness, it's strength. And in a single moment, he shifted the tone of the entire room. This wasn't just about a personal slight. It was about the values we expect from leaders. Can they rise above the noise? Can they stay grounded when provoked? Can they prove that leadership is about more than just winning the loudest argument? Kennedy's answer was clear, and it stunned everyone watching. This moment matters because it speaks to something bigger than politics. It speaks to families, to parents, to anyone who has ever felt the sting of a personal attack. It shows that even in a world where public life often rewards spectacle, there is still room for composure, for principle, for restraint. As we break down what happened that day, you'll see why this wasn't just a headline. It was a lesson in character, a lesson in focus, and a reminder of what true leadership looks like when tested in public view. The story doesn't end with the insult. It begins with the response, "Stay with me." Because once you hear exactly how Kennedy turned the tables, you'll understand why this moment will be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. To understand why this moment struck such a nerve, we need to step back and look at the bigger picture. Senator John Kennedy has always been known for his sharp wit, his quick comebacks, and his ability to cut through political theater with plain-spoken honesty. Over the years, he has built a reputation as someone who doesn't shy away from tough questions and isn't afraid to call things as he sees them. That directness has earned him both respect and criticism, but it has also made him a figure people pay attention to whenever he speaks now. In the world of politics, personal attacks aren't new. History is filled with examples of rivals targeting family members, not because those families are part of the debate, but because it's a way to strike where it hurts. For many leaders, that kind of insult triggers a strong emotional response. Some lash out, others retreat, but very few manage to handle it in a way that redefines the conversation. Kennedy's daughter has largely stayed out of the political spotlight. She's not a public figure, not someone constantly on camera, and that makes her an easy target. The insult directed at her wasn't just inappropriate. It crossed an unspoken line. Family has always been considered off limits, at least in principle, even when politics gets heated. So when this attack happened publicly, in a chamber where the whole nation was watching, the stakes were instantly higher. The atmosphere in that room mattered too. It wasn't a closed-door meeting or a private exchange. It was televised, recorded, and broadcast. Every word spoken that day was destined to live on, beyond that moment, replayed in clips, shared online, and dissected by commentators. In that environment, Kennedy didn't just have to think about his immediate reaction. He had to recognize that his words and demeanor would define the narrative moving forward. For context, this wasn't the first time he had been tested publicly. Kennedy had faced heated debates before, often delivering memorable one-liners that cut to the heart of the issue. But this was different. It wasn't about policy or law. It was personal, and that's why it drew so much attention. It wasn't only about what was said. It was about what it represented. If a leader can't hold composure when their own family is dragged into the spotlight, how can they handle the pressures of governing? The insult also tapped into a wider frustration among citizens about the way politics has been trending. More and more, people see personal jabs and theatrical outbursts replacing meaningful dialogue. The exchange that day became a microcosm of that frustration. One side leaned into spectacle, while Kennedy leaned into restraint. That contrast told a bigger story than the insult itself. It's also important to note the timing. This incident came at a period when Americans were already skeptical of political discourse, weary of seeing shouting matches dominate. Instead of solutions, Kennedy's response didn't just defend his daughter. It offered a rare glimpse of leadership, conducted with dignity, in a moment when people desperately needed to see it. So, When we analyze this event, we're not just looking at a single insult. We're looking at a situation that symbolized much more: the clash between spectacle and substance, the test of personal restraint under public scrutiny, and the reminder that even in politics, respect still matters. By the time Kennedy gave his response, the nation wasn't just watching. They were waiting, and what he said and how he said it turned what could have been a forgettable jab into a defining lesson in leadership. The moment it happened, you could feel the energy in the room shift. What began as a routine discussion quickly spiraled when a senator, perhaps trying to score points, crossed a line that most in politics still consider sacred. He aimed his words not at John Kennedy's policies, not at his record, but at his daughter. The insult wasn't clever. It wasn't rooted in debate. It was designed to sting, to provoke, to break composure, and it worked at least for a split second. The chamber went silent. People leaned forward, realizing they had just witnessed something different. This wasn't political theater anymore. This was personal. Kennedy's daughter, who had no role in the discussion, suddenly became the subject of ridicule. The cameras caught everything: the smug delivery, the awkward laughter, the stunned expressions from others in the room. It was the kind of moment that sparks instant headlines because it breaks an unspoken rule. Family members are supposed to be off limits. Everyone knows it. Within minutes, word spread beyond the chamber. Clips hit social media, journalists scrambled to frame the story, and hashtags began trending. The debate was no longer about the original policy issue. It was about the insult. And at the center of it all stood John Kennedy, with every eye fixed on him, waiting for a reaction. In that moment, Kennedy had a choice. He could strike back with equal venom, fueling the spectacle. He could walk away, ignoring the insult and appearing weak in the eyes of some. Or he could do something few expected: take control of the narrative without sacrificing his dignity. When he finally spoke, the silence was deafening. His tone was steady, his words were clear. He didn't shout, he didn't rage. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He reframed the attack into a lesson not just for the senator who made it, but for everyone watching. He reminded the chamber that politics is supposed to be about serving people, not tearing down families. He pointed out that dragging someone as children into the fray doesn't reveal strength, it reveals weakness. His remarks weren't long, but they carried weight. Every sentence felt deliberate, every pause commanded attention. What shocked the crowd wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Kennedy turned an insult into a moment of leadership, showing that composure can be stronger than anger. The contrast was undeniable. One senator resorted to cheap shots, while Kennedy elevated the conversation. That difference became the story. Outside the chamber, reactions poured in. Commentators noted how rare it was to see a politician handle a personal attack with such restraint. Supporters praised him for defending his daughter without descending into the mud. Even critics admitted the response was skillful. In an environment where shouting often drowns out substance, Kennedy's calm delivery cut through the noise. But make no mistake, this wasn't just about dignity. It was also a strategic move. By staying composed, Kennedy denied his opponent the reaction he was looking for. Instead of a fiery exchange that would dominate headlines, the focus shifted to Kennedy's poise. The insult backfired. The senator who delivered it came off as petty, while Kennedy came off as steady. This is where the scandal truly broke, not because of the insult itself, but because of how it played out in the court of public opinion. What might have been a fleeting moment of rudeness turned into a defining incident, one that people still talk about because of the way Kennedy handled it. It's important to note that scandals often hinge on perception more than facts. Here, the perception was clear. One leader lost control and another kept it. That's why this moment exploded beyond the chamber walls. It wasn't just a clash between two senators. It was a case study in leadership under pressure. By the end of the day, the story had shifted completely. The original insult was still being replayed, but not as a clever jab. It was being used as an example of poor judgment. Meanwhile, Kennedy's words were quoted in headlines, his calm demeanor replayed in clips, his defense of his daughter praised as both personal and principled. The scandal wasn't just that. Someone insulted Kennedy's daughter. It was that the insult revealed far more about the speaker than the target, and Kennedy's response turned that truth into the lasting takeaway. When the insult whereas it surfaced, many thought it would fade quickly. A heated moment in a crowded chamber, another sharp exchange, and then forgotten, but this time it didn't go away. Instead, it grew. Clips of the exchange went viral. Social media didn't just replay the insult, It replayed Kennedy's reaction over and over again. Audiences weren't just entertained. They were analyzing, debating, and sharing their views in real time. And with each replay, the focus shifted further away from the insult itself and more toward what it revealed about the senator who made it. Soon reporters began digging. They asked the question, was this just a slip of the tongue or part of a larger pattern? What they uncovered was eye-opening. This wasn't the first time the senator had crossed lines in public debate. There were past moments less publicized where personal attacks replaced substance, and each one now resurfaced, reshaping the narrative. Evidence piled up, transcripts of earlier hearings, clips from old debates, and even testimonies from colleagues who remembered similar incidents. One story became many. What looked like a single insult was now framed as a repeated habit, a weakness in judgment and temperament. The escalation didn't stop there. Commentators highlighted how this behavior undermines the very credibility of the office. When a senator reduces debate to personal attacks, they don't just embarrass themselves, they erode trust in the institution as a whole. And when that attack targets a family member, the damage feels even greater. Meanwhile, Kennedy's words from the chamber became a point of reference. Analysts replayed his calm reminder about keeping families out of politics. They compared it side by side with the senator's sharp remark, and the difference spoke louder than any commentary could. One looked petty, the other looked principled. Behind the scenes, staffers scrambled to contain the fallout. Statements were issued, attempts remade to reframe the insult as taken out of context, but the evidence didn't lie. The words were on record, the video was clear, and the public had already drawn their conclusions, step by step. The story grew beyond a single moment. Editorial boards weighed in, calling for higher standards of conduct. Advocacy groups pointed out how personal attacks distract from real issues. Even members of the senator's own party distanced themselves, unwilling to defend the indefensible. And then came the numbers. Polls showed a clear shift in public perception. Approval ratings dipped. Trust in the senator's judgment wavered. The insult had sparked something bigger than embarrassment. It had tangible political costs. This is how scandals escalate. They rarely stay confined to the initial spark. They spread when evidence builds, when patterns emerge, when the public sees not just one mistake, but a window into character. By this stage, the question wasn't about what was said. It was about what it meant. If a senator is willing to publicly insult a colleague's family, what does that reveal about their judgment under pressure? If they deflect instead of taking responsibility, what does that say about their leadership? Kennedy didn't have to do much to keep the story alive. His restraint had already framed the narrative. Each new revelation only reinforced the contrast between composure and recklessness, and as more evidence emerged, the scandal transformed from a single insult into a broader indictment of conduct in public life. The crowd may have been shocked in the moment, but as the evidence escalated, the country began to see the full picture. What happened that day wasn't just one senator losing his temper. It was a reminder of why character matters, why words carry weight, and why leadership is measured not in attacks, but in how you rise above them. The insult may have been the spark, but what it revealed was something far bigger than a single exchange. When people looked closer, they saw a system that had slowly allowed politics to drift away from principle and toward spectacle. The chamber wasn't meant to be a stage for insults. It was designed as a forum for debate, for argument grounded in facts and policy. Yet, in that moment, the line between public service and personal attack was blurred, and that raised a sobering question. How often does this happen? Unnoticed, journalists began connecting dots. This wasn't just about one senator. Over the years, others had leaned on cheap shots instead of strong reasoning. The culture of the chamber itself had begun to tolerate behavior that once would have been unthinkable. Reports surfaced of private warnings, quietly given of moments brushed aside because they didn't make headlines. Each example suggested the same thing, a pattern where accountability was weakened and standards were lowered. Kennedy's reaction put this issue into sharp relief. By calmly refusing to retaliate, he highlighted just how out of place the insult truly was. His composure became a silent indictment of a system that, too, often rewards noise over substance. As investigations continued, broader consequences became clear. Every time debates slip into personal territory, public trust erodes, citizens begin to wonder if leaders are more focused on scoring points than solving problems. And when trust falls, so does engagement. People tune out, convinced the system no longer serves them. Experts pointed to data showing declining approval ratings for Congress as a whole, noting that personal attacks fuel cynicism more than policy disputes ever could. This wasn't simply about bruised feelings, it was about the health of democracy itself. The scandal also revealed how partisanship amplifies the problem. Too often allies excuse bad behavior if it comes from their own side while condemning it fiercely from the other. The result: a double standard that weakens accountability across the board. Kennedy's mome. And however, cut through that noise, his focus wasn't on party lines, it was on principle. He reminded everyone that some standards are universal, that respect isn't optional, and that leadership means setting an example even under pressure. This episode opened a wider conversation about reform. Should there be clearer rules of conduct in debates? Should personal remarks trigger consequences beyond public criticism? These questions gained momentum not because of one insult, but because the public now saw the cost of letting such behavior slide. Beyond rules, it also raised questions about culture. Politics has increasingly become a performance shaped by sound bites and viral clips. The insult gained traction precisely because it fit that mold. But Kennedy's response, steady and measured, reminded audiences that real leadership often looks very different. It's less flashy, but far more powerful. The system was exposed not just in its flaws, but in its contrasts. On one side, a senator resorting to pettiness; on the other, a leader showing restraint. That split revealed the choice: facing the institution itself, continue down the path of spectacle, or recommit to the standards the public deserves. And while the moment embarrassed one senator, it also became a turning point for many observers. The public wasn't just entertained, they were reminded of what politics could be and what it too often is not. This wasn't just about Kennedy or his family. It was about every citizen watching. Because when leaders abandon respect, it's the people they represent who pay the price by exposing the systems. Weakness: the scandal created an opportunity. The question was whether the institution would seize it, or whether this would become just another story in the endless cycle of outrage. The chamber grew still. What had started as a routine discussion was now a defining moment. Everyone in the room leaned in, waiting to see how Senator Kennedy would respond. He had every reason to strike back. The insult was personal, it too cheated his family. Yet instead of anger, what he delivered was clarity. He began not with accusation, but with principle. His words were calm, his tone steady, and yet every syllable carried weight. Kennedy reminded his colleagues that public service is not a stage for cruelty. It is not a place for scoring cheap points. It is a trust, a responsibility, one that demands better than personal attacks. The silence that followed was powerful. Even those who might have disagreed with him on policy couldn't deny the force of his composure. He had turned what could have been a petty exchange into a lesson in leadership. Observers noted how quickly the atmosphere shifted. Just moments before, the room had been tense, charged with conflict. Now it was heavy with reflection. Kennedy had not only defended his family, he had elevated the standard for everyone present. Commentators later described it as the moment the balance tipped. What was meant to embarrass him instead strengthened his position. What was intended as humiliation became the spark for respect. His restraint had turned the insult into an indictment, not of him, but of the one who delivered it. The public reaction mirrored what happened inside the chamber. Clips of Kennedy's words spread rapidly, shared across platforms, with comments praising his dignity. Viewers saw not weakness, but strength. The kind of strength that comes from refusing to be dragged into the mud. The turning point wasn't just about one exchange. It was about the message it sent, that real power lies, not in the loudest voice, but in the voice that refuses to waver. Kennedy showed that leadership is not proven by striking back, but by standing firm when tested. And in that moment, something rare happened in politics. People from across divides agreed. They didn't have to share Kennedy's policies to recognize his integrity. They didn't need to be supporters to see the value in how he carried himself. For once, respect cut across party lines. That respect reshaped the narrative. What began as an attempt to weaken him had backfired completely. The spotlight no longer shone on the insult. It illuminated the contrast between two styles of leadership, one driven by pettiness, the other by principle. This was the point of no return. Kennedy had set a standard he could not step back from, and the chamber had been forced to confront what it had tolerated for too long. It was not only a personal victory, it was a challenge to the entire institution. By refusing to respond in kind, Kennedy had taken control of the story. He left no doubt about who stood taller in that moment. And for the public, it was clear dignity had carried the day. The climax wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic in the way politics often is. But that's what made it so powerful. Its strength came from restraint, from the rare decision to rise above, when the easier path was to sink lower. That choice, that turning point, became the moment people would remember, not the insult itself, but the response that transformed it. In the aftermath of that turning point, the atmosphere shifted not just inside the chamber, but far beyond it. What had been a moment of personal insult turned into a wider conversation about the tone of leadership. People began asking if dignity can disarm hostility in real time. Why shouldn't that be the expectation every day? Kennedy's response triggered reflection across party lines. Some lawmakers admitted quietly that they had grown accustomed to the spectacle of politics. The raised voices, the personal jabs, the endless cycle of one-upmanship. But this moment disrupted the pattern. It reminded them that leadership is measured not by how sharp an insult can be, but by how steady one stands in the storm. Reform didn't come overnight, but the conversation it sparked gave way to calls for higher standards in congressional discourse. Commentators on both sides recognized the shift. What was once dismissed as just politics was no longer so easily excused. Kennedy had demonstrated that the public was paying attention not only to what was said, but to how it was said. Within weeks, committees began discussing ways to establish clearer boundaries around conduct in public debate. Journalists noted that clips of congressional exchanges were no longer going viral for the insults, but for the composure shown in responding to them. Kennedy's restraint had changed the incentive structure. Dignity now attracted the spotlight. For the public, the ripple effect was just as important. Viewers saw that leadership could be principled without being combative. They realized that integrity was not weakness, but a form of strength that commanded respect. Kennedy's moment had created a model proof that decency could still resonate in a climate often fueled by division. Beyond Congress, schools, universities, and civic groups began referencing the exchange as an example of civility under pressure. Leadership programs cited it as a case study in responding to adversity. What started as an insult aimed at a family member became an unlikely lesson that traveled far outside the political arena. Even in the media, where conflict often drives coverage, analysts acknowledged that Kennedy's handling of the moment had raised expectations. Instead of rewarding aggression with attention, people were drawn to the calm authority of his words. The shift may have been subtle, but it was significant. It showed that respect could still capture headlines. The reforms that followed were not just procedural. They were cultural conversations about tone, about respect, and about the responsibility of public figures to set examples grew louder. Kennedy had not only defended his family, he had nudged the system toward a healthier standard. And while cynics argued that politics would always return to its combative roots, the record of that day stood as a reminder that another path was possible. The chamber had witnessed it. The public had seen it, and the narrative had changed. For Kennedy, this was never about winning points or silencing critics. It was about proving that leadership can be resilient without being cruel, principled, without being performative. That lesson became his legacy from the incident. Not the insult, not the controversy, but the reform it inspired. As one commentator put it, he turned a moment of humiliation into a moment of higher ground. That higher ground became a benchmark, one against which future exchanges would be measured, and it was clear those who failed to meet it would no longer escape notice. The resolution was not about silencing voices, it was about elevating them. Kennedy's example pushed the conversation upward, reminding both lawmakers and citizens that respect in discourse is not optional, it is essential. What began as an insult ended as a standard, and that standard once set could not be easily undone. When the dust settled, the lesson was undeniable. This was not just a story about an insult. It was a story about how we choose to respond when tested. Senator Kennedy showed that strength is not measured by volume, but by principle. His reaction proved that leadership is revealed most clearly under pressure, when the easier choice is to fight fire with fire. The first lesson is simple. Dignity disarms hostility by refusing to retaliate. Kennedy shifted the focus away from the insult and onto the higher standard he set. He proved that calm words can carry more force than sharp ones. The second lesson, leadership, is about example. His response didn't just protect his family. It sent a message to the entire chamber and to the millions watching that decency matters. When leaders rise above pettiness, they set the tone for everyone else. And the third lesson, true. Respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Kennedy earned it that day, not by speaking louder, but by standing taller. For those watching at home, these lessons matter far beyond politics. In workplaces, in schools, in families everywhere, conflict arises. The choice remains the same. Do we lower ourselves to the level of the insult, or do we stand firm and rise above it? Kennedy's example shows that the higher road, though harder in the moment, is always the one remembered. And now, the call is to us, as citizens, as participants in public life. We have the power to demand more. We can insist that our leaders act with integrity. We can reward dignity with support, and we can reject the cycle of insult that drags discourse downward. Senator Kennedy's reaction is a reminder that respect is not outdated and integrity is not weakness. They are the cornerstones of leadership, and they remain as relevant now as ever. To close, let's return to the words that captured the spirit of his response. The measure of a person is not how they treat the powerful, but how they respond when their loved ones are attacked. That is when character is revealed. So as we reflect on this moment, let it be more than a story we watched. Let it be a standard we carry forward, because dignity is not just a choice, it is a responsibility. And when leaders embrace it, the entire nation benefits.